This is coming from the New International Version Bible. It's the book of Ruth, chapter 3, verses 11 through 16. It's Boaz speaking with Ruth. "And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people in my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, "No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor." He also said, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out." When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Would you bow with me for prayer? Father, with the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, welcome, you guys. We are in our 3rd week of Ruth, but our 7th week of our Impact series, impacting the people of San Antonio and Northern Hills through love, hospitality, discipleship, and challenge. And I know that 2 weeks ago, Pastor Lupina spoke to you about discipleship. And we get this amazing summary of discipleship from Ruth to Naomi, that I will go where you go and your God will be my God. And then last week we talked about Ruth chapter 2, where Boaz meets Ruth. And we talked about how he was so hospitable to her. And we talked about the 4 qualities that are shown in that story about hospitality. Hospitality shares, hospitality sacrifices, hospitality thinks ahead, and hospitality preserves the dignity of the recipients. And today we're talking about chapter 3, another interaction between Boaz and Ruth, and we're talking about love. Now, last week I gave you some homework. The 2 things of homework I gave you was, one, to find a way to practice hospitality, and then the bonus homework, if you call it bonus, is to watch either Fiddler on the Roof or Matchmaker from that musical. Who did it? Fantastic. Okay. It's the trend of all Sunday long when I've asked who did it. So you know, 2 people did. They're now my favorites, just so you know. That's okay, because actually it's great, because now I get to explain it to you. So just so you know, if you haven't seen Fiddler on the Roof, spoilers are totally coming. So, and the musical's a little older, but I'm mostly quoting from the movie in 71. So the main character, the protagonist, his name is Tebia. He's a milkman. He's of Jewish descent, and he lives in Russia. And he has 5 daughters. And did someone say 7? No, okay, I think it's 5. It could be 7, but I'm only talking about the oldest 3 for Matchmaker, because the matchmaker for the community has come and thinks she's found a match for the oldest daughter, and there's a lot of consternation about this. The oldest daughter, who we find out later, has already pledged herself to her childhood friend to be married. Is not excited, but the other 2 are, because now that the oldest daughter is getting married, the way is free for them to begin the matchmaking process with this little old lady who is the matchmaker. And they're excited. So the beginning of the song starts with daughter number 2 and daughter number 3 talking about how they're so excited about the matchmaker and send me a husband both tall and fair and rich and make him a scholar and all these amazing things. And you get the sense that they really think that their whole lives will be righted by the application of the ideal husband. And then the oldest daughter starts to sing. And she starts to just douse their hopes and dreams with cold water. And there's some themes in this musical that you really probably couldn't get away with in today's culture. But she's talking about like, oh, the matchmaker will come and she'll find you a nice young husband who's only 62. And then it gets even worse with the third daughter where she's playing the part of the matchmaker. And she goes, oh, there'll be this lovely husband. He's so nice. He'll beat you every night, but only when he's sober. So you're all right. And you get this whole sense that by the end of the song, the youngest 2 daughters change their tune and are realizing that they're saying, okay, up until this moment, I misunderstood that I could get stuck for good with the matchmaker. So they basically tell the matchmaker, just take your time. Take your time. And the rest of the movie plays out with these 3 daughters finding husbands outside the decisions of both the matchmaker and their father Tebier. And it happens at a time where there's political unrest for the Jewish communities in Russia. It's an amazing musical. But the reason I kind of centered on that matchmaker song is because that's what Naomi is doing here. She's playing the matchmaker between Boaz and Ruth. Last chapter, she sent him to she sent Ruth, to Boaz's field to glean. And now she's sending him to the threshing floor to be at his feet. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But she knows what she's doing. This is Naomi. And I don't want to go full on, she's manipulating the situation, but she definitely has intentions of hooking up Boaz and Ruth. Now, some people, some scholars think, well, she might not know about this other guardian redeemer out there that Boaz talks about in our scripture, but I think that she probably does. The guardian redeemer is a relative of hers, at least a relative of her late husband. So she would know about them. She has chosen Boaz. And I think she has chosen Boaz for the reasons that we're going to see from our scripture reading. So don't mistake that Naomi sends Ruth to Boaz. But stepping Ruth out into this situation had some risk. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before that, I want to talk about the process and the act of laying down at somebody's feet. This was not a subtle thing. This was not a text. It wasn't a glance across a clouded room. It wasn't eye sparklies. It wasn't a whistle from a construction site. No, this was more than that. This was a declaration. Laying down at a gentleman's feet is almost like saying, I am yours. I am submitting myself to your will. She is doing something very big and daring here. Now, we don't know what Boaz's mindset was before this. We know that from chapter 2 that he was impressed with Ruth. We know that he thought that she was an honorable woman, and he says so to her. We don't know if maybe he's saying, well, she's young, she's too young for me. Maybe there's a younger guy in Bethlehem that she will like. Maybe he knows, we know he knows about this other guardian redeemer, so maybe he's just waiting for that other kinsman or other guardian redeemer because that guy has the right of first refusal in this situation with Ruth and Naomi. We don't know what he's waiting on. Or maybe just, being a guy and it hasn't entered into his mind yet. But when Ruth lays down at his feet, it forces the issue. He can no longer just chill and hang back and see what's going on. He has to respond. He has to react because she has made an overture here, a declaration of something. And so, he responds, and he responds in a really cool way. The first thing he says after he discovers her at his feet and after she basically makes a proposal to him like, hey, I want you to be this person for me, he recognizes that there's fear in her life. And so the first thing he says is, do not fear. Do not fear is huge. And we're going to talk a little bit about this today, how fear and love are opposites. And we heard Abel talking about that amazing thing, that imperfect love drives out all fear. Boaz recognizes this right from the beginning. And so his first words are, do not fear. And then he goes along to also shows respect for the culture by saying, hey, I will do all that you ask. But there's the other guardian redeemer, this other kinsman redeemer, and he has the first bid at this responsibility. I have to let him take the lead here. But if he does not take up the mantle of this responsibility, then I will. He makes a pledge at that moment doing it. And so what he's basically saying to Ruth is that I will make sure that you are taken care of, you and Naomi. You are not going to be a beggar in the streets. You are going to get to eat from this point forward, because if it's not me, it's this other guy. And if the other guy doesn't do it, I'm stepping up to the plate. And I'll take care of your needs. And that's a really cool thing for him to realize when he's probably just kind of waking up and groggy from her laying at his feet. And then he asked her to wait there. Some translations use the word tarry. And if you know how much I love the word tarry, it says tarry here until morning. And in the morning, whenever everybody is kind of asleep, they wake up. And he says to her that no one should know that a woman came to the threshing floor. Now, he misspeaks a little here, so let me talk to you a little about this. I want to talk to you more about the threshing floor. So last week, we talked about the harvest, where they're cutting stalks down and they're bundling up, and we talked about the hospitality of dropping good stalks of wheat for Ruth to glean. Now we're on the threshing floor. And the threshing is the last step in the harvest process. So what it was it was a flat floor. Sometimes it was brick, sometimes it was just flat rocks that were large and laid out. And they would separate the stalks of wheat and the grains and separate the chaff from the good grains. And the reason they put this on a floor, because that way they wouldn't lose any of the grains in the grass. And so the process of threshing was basically to separate the grains, the good grains of barley in this case, and get it. And then to finish it up, they put it in jars. They sealed up the jars. Now, we put it in silos or bags, but it had to be dry, because if it was wet, it'd get moldy, or it would spontaneously combust, which is kind of cool. But at the same time, there's something else going on here. Because the harvest process takes weeks, and the harvesters work usually from sun up to sun down, and it's a long, harsh process to both harvest, bundle, and then thresh and jar and store. Now, at the beginning of the harvest, the harvesters had a ton of work in front of them and probably no money. But by the end of the threshing, which is the last step in this process, they have their food either ready to be stored, ready to be eaten, or rather to be sold out. So the landowners, all of a sudden, to have their wealth that was one time in the field, it's now ready to go. And this is also when the harvesters got paid. So the harvesters who've been working day and night, or at least during the day into the night, for weeks, now have no work in front of them and have money. And what this is they throw a party. A party of someone who all of a sudden has a lot of time and a lot of money. And it's a big party. Now, it's not like Thanksgiving, where you just invite family over and eat way too much food. No, this is like Oktoberfest. You guys have been to Oktoberfest, right? You know what happens at Oktoberfest. Besides the chicken dance, what else happens? Thank you. Yeah, beer is happening. These guys celebrate big time. And it starts right there at the threshing floor. So when Boaz says to Ruth, no one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor, He's actually not speaking 100% truth there. What he's actually saying there is no one should know that a respectable, honorable woman came to the threshing floor. Because where there's inebriated partygoers who have money, there's also women. But it's not the kind of woman that you want to take home to mom, if that makes sense. Okay? So you have these things going on here. And so if Ruth was there, she was present in this situation, there's two things that could have happened to her. One, a partygoer could have misunderstood the type of lady she was. Or two, someone could have seen her there, and her reputation would have been gone. And her honor and the respect that she got in the community was about the only asset that she had. So when Boaz tells her no one could know that a woman came here, stay close to me, he's protecting her in two ways. One, both physically, and two, socially. And so they wait there until the morning when it's the twilight hours and all the partygoers have finally given up and are going to sleep. And then he says, bring me your shawl. And he fills the shawl with, it says, 6 measures. We don't know exactly how much this is, but some scholars have said this could weigh between 20 and 30 pounds of grain that he's giving to her to provide for her immediate need. And this is an interesting, and also scholars disagree on this. So some say that he basically, when it says he placed the bundle on her, they think that basically it was a heavy load, so she was just helping to get it on to her so she could manage the weight there. But there's another Middle Eastern tradition that if you put your shawl around someone's head, it's a declaration of intent to marry. And so we don't know what exactly Boaz is trying to do here. Maybe he's just being chivalrous and maybe being nice and pleasant and just trying to help her with this pack of grain that he's given her. Or maybe he's saying something else, that he intends to marry her. And we don't know, but what we do see here is Boaz doing some really cool things that are reflections of love. One, that he has, at least being chivalrous, maybe even declaring his intent. He's protecting her, both physically and society. And he's promising that he will take care of her needs long term. Either he will, or he'll make sure that this other kinsman redeemer does. And we're going to talk more about that next week. But I want to focus for just a few moments on the difference between love and fear. My daughter's absolute favorite movie of all time is Frozen. Now, about I think it was 6 or 7 years ago, I think maybe 6, Amelia was just a baby when it came out, but she immediately wanted to see Frozen. I remember distinctly seeing the commercials for Frozen and rolling my eyes. Oh, great. Another Disney movie where a princess gets in trouble and a prince comes to save her. I had just seen Tangled, which was the movie before this one. I'm like, oh, look, it's the exact same thing over and over again. And I was pleasantly surprised when I saw that and sat down to watch it with my entire family. Okay, oh, by the way, spoilers for Frozen. If you haven't seen it, shame on you. It's amazing. And 2, we're giving spoilers, but you should see it soon because the sequel's coming out, and it's supposed to be amazing. I'm guarantee you that I'll be seeing it in the movie theater, not by my own choice. But anyway, so in this movie, in this Frozen movie, you have the queen, who is Elsa, who has been born with this power to freeze things. And she sees this kind of wise troll, who, just hard to say, wise troll, who says, hey, your power is powered by fear. So throughout the beginning of the movie, the more she fears, the more power she has, and the more she freezes things and can't control her power, the more fear she has. And so this keeps on going until there's an incident where people and places are frozen. And then in the outcome of this thing, basically her sister Anna, who really has no idea what's going on in the movie, gets zapped with like a frozen ray. And so the second half of the movie, Anna is slowly freezing from the inside out. And this same wise troll basically says to her, no, only an act of true love can thaw a frozen heart. And so the last 20 minutes of the movie is her trying to find a way to unfreeze herself. And thaw herself just doesn't work there. Unfreeze herself. And at the very climax of the movie, the last just few minutes, she has a choice between saving herself and saving her sister, the queen, Elsa. And she does. She chooses to sacrifice herself to save her sister. But in the moment there, that's an act of true love. And so she ends up saving herself and her sister in a really cool way. See the movie, it's worth it. Good songs. There's also a snowman that comes to life. It's awesome. But what I love about that movie is two things. First of all, I really like the fact, particularly for my daughter, that she doesn't need a man to save her. Love that part of it. And I want her to keep that mode until like she's 45 or 50 years old. But then the second part is that Elsa, the queen, realizes that she can undo this frozen power through the application of love. And she realizes that fear and love are the exact opposites. And so I'm hoping this plays out in the sequel. I guess we'll find out in a couple of months. But that's what we're seeing here from Boaz and Ruth. That Boaz provides a way to alleviate the fears of Ruth. And he protects her in multiple ways and also does what he can to provide for her, not just in the moment, but also in the long term. And next week we're going to learn about how that plays out with this kinsman redeemer. But there's something that we can easily miss in this story and in Frozen. If you haven't seen Frozen, or if you have, the beginning song of Frozen is these ice harvesters who are talking about love and fear in the frozen heart that they're mining for ice. The very first of the song talks about how love and fear are polar opposites and how love can overcome fear. It's the same in this story. Because if you don't see the first thing that happens in this story isn't an act of love by Boaz, it's an act of vulnerability by Ruth. Naomi sends Ruth out of her comfort zone. She sends her to the feet of a man that she doesn't know very well, into a place that's both physically and socially dangerous. And Ruth goes in hope. That is an amazing act of vulnerability that we can easily miss in this story because Boaz is being so cool. But Ruth is the one who shows aspects of love that's easy to miss. So this week, when you're thinking about expressions of love and how love overcomes fear, remember also that love steps out in vulnerability first. Love takes initiatives, like Ruth taking the initiative through Naomi's request to step out at the feet of Boaz, leading to this story of love that is the greatest story of love in the Old Testament. And later on, we'll see is actually, next week, the story of Christ among us. But for now, would you pray with me?